Hi, everybody. Welcome to Modern Day Apocrypha. I am Nick Johnson.
And I'm Tony Skinner.
And we're glad to have you. Today, we're talking about nutrition, continuing our series that we've been doing. So if you haven't seen the first two parts, go check them out over the past few episodes. And today, Tony and I are talking about GMOs versus organic foods.
Yeah, the last convo we had was carnivores versus vegans, which really wasn't a cage match, but we said it was. And so today is cage match number 2. Where we're going to fight things, and something's going to win, or we might just be educated.
So if we can bring out our two contestants, in the red corner, we've got the GMO fighter, and in the blue corner, Tony's going to be batting for the organic team.
Yeah, I really am.
I'm kidding. It's not a team issue here at all. We're just interested in diving in and exploring these topics, something that I wasn't too familiar with until I had started looking into it. And I'm excited to jump into this one, Tony.
Yeah, it's funny because I had heard some thoughts from people around some of these topics. And I was like, yeah, I don't know. I've never looked into it. And I went into it looking to disprove these thoughts or to paint a better picture than what had been painted for me previously. And all I did was reinforce what I went into fight. So that was surprising to me. So I think it'll be a good convo today.
Yeah, definitely. All right. So let's just start first things first, just to prove that I'm your everyday average Joe. I didn't know what GMO was. So GMO is a genetically modified organism.
Yep.
And here I am all my past, 10 years that I've been aware of the term, thinking that GMOs were like additives that people are putting in the foods and shit.
No, well, it kind of is, because it's additives into the DNA, which then go into the food.
Right.
So you were right, just not.
Yeah, just not. I don't think that I need the credit there. I'll just take the L and we'll continue.
I've always got your back, bro.
Appreciate it, man. But I did purchase organic foods, not even whenever I thought about it, just whenever I purchased them. So I would make a conscious effort to purchase organic foods instead of non-organic foods.
Well, you put it into the caveman stuff you hear of GMO bad, organic good.
Yeah, I think that's a good way to think about it. But then I'm also looking at the cost of that chicken, and
Right.
I'm like, all right, $8 a pound or $5. I'll take the $5. So definitely shop down the budget.
Without any why. Additives, MSG.
Right, exactly.
Okay, but talk to me like a human. Don't just spam me. Explain, communicate.
So, Tony, I think that's one of the spots that I came to the conclusion on is that it seems like a lot of this language that's being used is just marketing. It has meaning, and we'll get into that. And actually, maybe this is just the right time to get into that, but it has meaning. But I think people who are selling the products are really taking advantage of using terminology that resonates with customers, which is exactly what they should be doing. And caught up in the mix is the GMO and organic and free range and pasture raised, grass fed, all of that terminology gets tied up with all of that.
Right.
And it creates a mess because to you and me, well, I'm not going to speak for you. You knew what GMO was.
But prior to really digging into this, I didn't.
Sure.
Again, all I knew was GMO bad, organic good. Okay. I guess I'll get the good stuff then,
Right. Exactly. Yeah.
But I didn't know why.
And then I'm feeling guilty whenever I'm like, well, I'll save a few bucks. I'm a little broke right now. And I'll get the conventional chicken. I'll settle.
Chicken. Yeah. But after today, man, I'll jump to the end. I get it. And again, I could be wrong. There's no way I can know all of everything on this topic. You and I have come to, on our brief consult before we started the show, you kind of came to your conclusion and I came to mine and was like, oh, wildly different
They're
tonight.
Different. Yeah.
Neat.
So I'm excited for this one, man. So, all right. First of all, I just started looking into organic foods and I was like, what does it mean to be organic? Basically, it means to be not fucked with.
Yeah.
And that sounds inherently good. And that's my mindset on just about everything is like, the less fuckery that humans do, the better off it's going to be. And that's not necessarily true. There are, I won't do this person justice because I forgot their name, but somebody came on.
Starting off strong.
Right. Somebody came on the Joe Rogan podcast and did a whole episode on like natural versus unnatural.
Yeah, I remember you talking about that before.
And so that's not necessarily the same as like organic versus GMO. It kind of skates that line.
Kind of fits.
But basically, the argument to be made there was that natural doesn't just inherently mean better. Where that's where I think a lot of people are ingrained, myself included.
Sure.
That like natural has got to be better. But that's not necessarily the case. So I digress. Going back to organic foods, what it essentially means is that there is no synthetic fertilizers being used. So think they're predominantly using manure. There are no antibiotics or hormones being used.
Yep.
They are not genetically modified. That seems to be obvious, but they're not GMO foods.
Right.
There are a list of other criteria, but those seem to be the main ones. But one that did stand out to me was that you could not use sewage sludge with GMO or with organic foods.
Which begs the question, you can use sewage sludge for non-organic food.
You sure can. And that sounds disgusting, but what it really boils down to is it's just human poop. And that's the same thing as cow manure and poop that's coming out in that sense. And it ultimately just becomes fertilizer. Sounds gross. But that's what we're eating, people. That's what we're eating.
I just don't want to eat ever again. Anything. I'm not just maybe do that Soylent stuff or Huel or just I'm drinking my drinks and we'll call it good.
Yeah.
I couldn't do that. I like food too much.
So yeah, definitely sounds gross. But when you really sit down and think about it, it's manure or anything else that people have used for thousands and thousands of years as a fertilizer.
Yeah, but I think the psychological weirdness of it is I excreted that out. It's bad for me. It has no value. I don't need it. But let's put it in the cycle of food to re-ingest it.
Yeah. So, okay. There are too many of those like extreme home shows.
Yeah.
One of them that I watched was a completely self-contained ecosystem. You take a poop. The poop drops down into a little like facility that just sterilized it or whatever the process was, how to process. And then all of the nutrients in your little turd would get circulated back up into this like ecosystem that was fueled by the water coming out of your little poop reservoir. And so just to paint the broader picture and give some of that context, this guy had built a log cabin home and then a greenhouse over his log cabin home. And it's like not your traditional log cabin. It's a nice home. And so it's like a large greenhouse, an enormous greenhouse. And he's got like trees in there and he'll wake up in the mornings, go up to the rooftop, pick the grapes that are wrapped around his railing. He's just surrounded by this little like rainforest in the middle of Sweden or Norway or whatever Scandinavian country he was in.
Hashtag Mars colony.
Pretty badass. Yeah, it was cool, man. And his whole family's living it.
That's cool.
So, yeah, enjoy your poops.
Okay, I can breathe again. I feel better. No, Tony, it works out. You're not eating it directly. It's grapes you walk upstairs for. It's okay.
Yeah, we're all right. The grapes have made it clean. One last little piece on the organic side. We covered like crops or vegetables, fruits, things that are grown, but we also have animals that can be organic. And so cows, for example, have to eat grass 1/3 of the year for whatever that means. And pigs and chickens need the option to go outside.
So from what I saw here from the USDA.gov site, defining the organic, how they defined it was that animals are raised in living conditions accommodating their natural behaviors. So the ability to graze on pasture, not that they do, but the ability. So that's what you're talking
Right,
about.
the option.
The option to go out, and they're fed 100% organic feed and forage. So even the food that you give them can't be genetically modified, which makes sense because if you're fucking with DNA and then they're ingesting it, it's pretty much the same as directly fucking with their DNA.
Right.
And so if people are trying to avoid that, it breaks the qualification. And then the antibiotics thing was interesting because I re-listened to our Carnivegan episode today. And in there, we talked a little bit about the antibiotics towards the end and how that can fuck up your gut biome.
Mm-hmm.
And so I wonder if that's some of the other problems or alleged problems that come with GMOs is that it's another instigator of that gut biome.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that totally makes sense. We might be cutting ahead too far, but did you come across any research that said that it was?
That was all speculation right there. It just was kind of,
Well, I'll tell you what, just from a uneducated, ignorant perspective, it makes sense that it would, but I did come across, I didn't go through individual studies, but I read like conclusions of studies, if you will. And there were, across this entire episode, we're going to talk about like mixed results.
Yep.
Good. I'm glad that you came and saw stuff like that as well. But when it came to antibiotics, it seems that the vast majority of studies point to them being completely safe and okay to consume. That still doesn't give me the feel goods.
No.
So like I've got eyebrows raised, and on both sides of this argument are again the pesky lobbyists who, and it's not necessarily always lobbyists, but people.
It's easy way for a discussion's sake.
Yes, people who have interest in organic foods are going to promote studies that show that organic foods are better or GMOs are bad, and then vice versa is true as well. And so it muddies up the whole system. So when my teacher was telling me don't use Wikipedia, I feel like joke's on them because you can't even use reliable sources either because they all have a bias.
Right.
It's crazy.
I think the reason why, and here we go, conspiracy note for the day. I'm sure there'll be more. I think the reason why they don't want us to use Wikipedia is because it's information through someone else that doesn't have a filter. Whereas an official filter has a choke point that can be influenced, with money, whatever. We talked about those interests pushing one direction or another. Wikipedia or open source things like Reddit or social media have the ability to
Manipulate
not have
Wall Street.
That too, but not have choke points. Unless, you start running all the ads, but then it's a little harder to do.
When you say choke point, you mean like a peer-reviewed study would have a choke point in that other scientists had to review the work that had been done and like sign off on it.
Instead of having a bunch of people all have a voice, let's talk to the one person who should have credentials to have a voice, and we pay them to direct what they're going to say or whatever. That's the choke point.
Gotcha. And on one of the previous episodes, we had even talked about like a lack of authority figure because the internet just gave everybody a voice, and we've got a lot of uneducated opinions, and I'm throwing my own out there.
Of course.
But we all are. And that just makes it that much more confusing. But then we also look at the authorities that created the food pyramid. We just keep bashing on that. And
We do.
Or it's just an example.
Or even current day authorities on anything. You look at politics stuff and they say one thing, and then 3 months or 3 days later, it's totally different or exactly the opposite. And so how do you actually have faith and trust in something or someone who's an authority when such a good number of them, by their actions, undermine their own authority?
Dr. Fauci, just like a few months ago when this whole thing unrolled, was like, we don't need masks. And it turns out that he came on the record and actually said, yeah, we knew that masks were effective against the coronavirus, but there was a shortage and we didn't want everybody to keep the healthcare workers from getting them. And so it's like, okay, I understand the logic and I agree that the healthcare workers are the ones that need it the most. But can we not just be like upfront and be like, hey guys,
Right.
masks are effective. There's no need to panic. Grab one pack. You'll be good for a while, and we'll make sure that the healthcare workers get them. We need to make sure that they get them first, and then everybody goes on their way. And good people will be good people, and bad people will be bad people. And I bet there's not going to be that big of a problem.
And then
But I'm also uneducated. So.
they double down and say 3 masks, 4 masks.
Yeah, I just heard today that
Like,
they
what the
confirmed that 2
fuck?
masks is better.
Like, you guys are full of shit.
They're just trying to pad 3M stock prices.
Well, yeah, and we had all these companies printing all these masks. Shit, we have a surplus. Hey guys, 2 masks is better than 1. Okay. Okay, what do you believe, you know?
Yeah.
No masks, 1 mask, 6 masks. And there's credible voices on all saying all directions. What the fuck?
Yeah.
What the fuck?
So I know this is the theme, but the onus is on us to figure it all out.
Exactly.
It's up to you if you're listening to this. This is your time to shine.
Let us know when you figure it out so we can be more confused. Yeah, jumping into GMOs, man. It's funny how you said you started with organic. I started with GMOs because I have heard only bad things. And so
me too.
I went in going, man, there's got to be a good thing. Well, I assume people are generally good at heart and have, even if the actions they have are fucked up because of experiences, whatever, I don't think people wake up and go, how do I fuck someone else over today? Before their own filter, I'm trying to serve myself. And you might not be thinking about the collateral of the other people you fuck over, but it's the end goal. I don't think starts with, let me screw somebody else. It always starts with, let me benefit me or the people I care about.
Sure. Yep.
Once you get too focused on me and the people you care about, it can trample other people you don't know. And that's where shit gets weird. So taking all that, I went in here going, nobody woke up and said, let's fuck with plants so we can fuck with humanity. Maybe I'm wrong. But I was looking for, where's the silver lining? Where's the good stuff? Where's what? And I didn't find it. Like, I saw more stuff that made these not consistent, and where you had to, like, one of the things I found was when they put the DNA into the crops, they're going in the lab and monitored for the desired traits. And it's not I put peanut butter on a sandwich and it's there. I put it into the sequence and hopefully it pops out the way I want it to. So over hundreds, sometimes out of hundreds of thousands of these crops that are grown, only a few match the desired traits. And those are the ones that are duplicated and propagated out.
Right.
So it's wildly inefficient. And I think when we looked at and talked a little bit about like CRISPR technology previously, it's made out to believe that it's real intelligent and real easy. And we just cut and paste like we edit a video. And it's just there and smooth transition and it's beautiful. Whereas when you get into the truth of it, what you're doing is you break it and it mutates back. And that mutation isn't always consistent. And so fucking with DNA is as bad as it sounds.
So question, I had read that there are different methods for genetically modifying organisms. You've got chemical, you've got radiation, and then you've got like what you're talking about with CRISPR, like gene manipulation in a different sense. It's all gene manipulation, but you get what I'm saying. So do you know if that was the case for all of them?
What do you mean?
Like all techniques?
As far as, because it's all a mutation.
Right.
So even if you're putting radiation, you're putting whatever, it's still going to be inconsistent because they're not able to wire it specifically. They can get pretty damn close.
And so it's like, even with CRISPR, it's a crapshoot.
Right.
Gotcha.
Now, their 50% chance is better than a crapshoot or 80, whatever it is, but it's still inconsistent and it's a mutation. It's not just like putting code in. There's still uncalculated shit that can happen.
Yeah, that makes sense.
That surprised me when I was reading that today.
Yeah, I've been under the impression that like CRISPR type technologies are like copy paste.
Yeah.
And so it's not that simple. That makes sense though. So you talked about having like a bunch of crops and trying to find the traits that are desirable, and then we take those and propagate them. How is that different than like selective breeding techniques that have been done for a long time?
Sure. And that was one of the arguments that I came up against in my research was selective breeding is same species and same species continually breeding until you find the traits. Everything there was in that specific gene pool. One of the common things that they'll do is put a protein or a piece of DNA into these plants so that they become bug resistant. That protein or something that they're putting in there is not from that species of plant.
Right. So they can pull it from a virus or anywhere else.
They're crossing species, which typically doesn't happen often, if at all.
Yeah. Yeah. It's pretty damn close to impossible.
And so when
You've got like mules that come out of that.
But still, you're kind of still in that same family.
Right.
But when you're doing, I think they called it horizontal gene mutation versus vertical, you're transferring genes through like a family line like we're used to. But when you do it horizontal, you're picking from these other pools and creating God knows what.
Glowfish.
Exactly.
You're creating glowfish.
Dude, I used to work in an aquarium and we had glowfish. And out of all the fish that we had, those guys died hundreds by the day.
Yeah.
Because they were fucked with. They glowed.
Abort mission.
Yeah, I'm stuck going, how do you say?
Glowed, I think.
They glowed. Thank you.
I don't think they glue.
I was like, that doesn't sound right. They glowed. They lit up when you shined a light on them. There we go. The glowfish. Moving on. They were fucked up and it didn't. So it could be from the dye too, though, because I think that dye has to get put in.
Too?
I think that's what I understood from working there.
Those poor little fuckers.
Exactly. You put them through this craziness. Of course, they're not going to be as sustainable. But anyways, with the corn, putting it was a bee something or whatever, from what I was reading. It's a common one to be bug repellent.
Gotcha.
They don't have a way to target just areas. So that way, like the stalks and the food would be bug repellent. It happens to the whole organism. The problem with this is then it hits the pollen, and then your bees come and eat the pollen,
right,
and your butterflies, and it kills them off. So it's not just killing the pest that we're trying to kill. We're potentially killing all of these other things that help keep things pollinated. And we've heard in the past couple of years that bee populations have been in a bad space. And to me, I see part of the picture why.
Yeah, so that makes sense. And that was something that I had read about too, was that like the concern with GMOs isn't necessarily just the GMOs itself. It's what happens if you've got a genetically modified cow and it breeds with another normal cow, conventional cow.
OG cow.
What? Yeah, the OGs. What happens, and like, can we always keep track of that? Because it's not as simple as just doing a DNA sequence to figure out which one's genetically modified and which one isn't. Like, it's more complex than that.
Definitely.
So my question is, first of all of that makes sense. And my gut would say I'm all on board with that. Like, fucking with things seems to not be a good thing. And I think you gave some good examples of how it might be impacting organisms and killing them faster. Bees being a really good example. Is there anything that suggests that it's actually like killing the organisms faster? Like, has anybody done studies that say a genetically modified wheat crop is causing that plant to die or causing a bee who pollinates it to die?
I don't know if it got that specific. And I was scouring through a lot because there's a lot of studies out on this.
Yeah.
So it was interesting to kind of scroll through, and I didn't get those specifics though.
The reason I ask is because in my thought process is I don't want to like make the assumption that it's causing harm when it may not be. From my viewpoint, I think the reason why I've been so interested in like the natural versus unnatural type conversation or mindset is because when it comes to organisms, plants, vegetables, fruits, animals, whatever it is, they've stood the test of time. And that time is a hell of a long time. And so over the millennia, things have balanced out and they've become stable. And that stability is a good thing because it's like, okay, I know that type of mushroom is poisonous and bad for me. And I know that type of mushroom is okay to eat. It's got good nutrition and etc. When it comes to GMOs, the way that I think about them is that we're just fast tracking that process. And so you'll have some hits and you'll have some misses. And so whenever you have the hits, those can be a net good thing. Whenever you have the misses, it's just important to identify those misses and make sure that those don't get circulated into the system. But as long as that process stays intact, I view it more as like a catalyst to the natural order of evolution.
Yeah. My fear is, though, is that people don't want to label a miss and people don't want to own a miss. And it's easy to say, oh, this genetically modified whatever, starting to get out of, we're going to look the other way. Because we're really not, we might not see the impacts of that for another 100, 200, however many years. And then how many of those happen because we're in this really fucking with shit really fast? In my mind, I think a lot of shit can get way out of hand really quick on the long scale of things, but not quick enough in our lifetime that we might catch it.
I agree. And it's the same kind of concept as like things that cause cancer, carcinogens. And this is where I just don't have a background to really have a strong opinion here, but my gut says that there are going to be some things that our studies aren't able to pick up because they're too short-sighted. And sometimes you just kind of have to take that. Like if you've got, let's take the coronavirus vaccine as an example. We're in such a rush to get it out there. It's passed all of the preliminary tests. And so like the early indicators are 2 thumbs up. But what happens if it turns out that it's actually slowly manipulating our DNA and the studies that have gone into this haven't been able to pick up the DNA manipulation? And
well, prior to this vaccine, no vaccine was released without 7 years of testing.
Yeah, and here we are with 7 months.
Yep.
Tops probably 7 months. So yeah, I'm all there with you. Like I've got a lot of skepticism around the GMO and around anything that's just being rushed through because there are limitations to what we can test and what we can't.
Of course. One thing that I thought was wild and made me really perk up my ears and go, yeah, I think GMOs are as bad as what the whispers say, was in this one paper I was reading. It was kind of a collection of papers. And they pointed out that a lot of researchers that speak out or have done studies to say, hey, GMOs do these bad things, their silence and their careers are discredited. So they had a list of like half a dozen or so exact names.
Wow.
And their story. One story, who's a scientist on TV, his name was 𝗟𝗶𝘀𝘁𝗿𝗁. Sorry for your name, bro. But he was funded by the British people. So a TV show that was funded by the British people showed his study of potatoes showing pre-cancer markers in rats after 90 days of eating these genetically modified potatoes in the stomach lining. After the broadcast, he was congratulated by his employer, which was an institute, saying, great job, you handled the questions really well. And then within a few days, he was fired, his research was confiscated, and his team was disbanded. He was
sick, dude.
Here's where it gets even crazier. It's said that Monsanto called Bill Clinton, who was the sitting president at the time, who called Tony Blair, the prime minister at that time, who called the institute, who quickly changed their mind. So it was all political. It wasn't actually that the shit was not real.
So the study, though, was that the potatoes were cancerous.
Basically, yeah. It was only 90 days, but in 90 days, there was enough bad reactions in the mice, specifically in the stomach lining, that showed pre-cancer markers. Now, if you're getting cancer in 90 days,
yeah,
like that's real bad. So,
granted, a mouse's metabolism is a lot faster, but yeah,
but
point
still,
made. first of all, cancer, just any cancer, regardless of the time frame, hard pass.
Exactly.
No thanks. So this is so you and I talked before this, and I had come to the conclusion that GMOs aren't a bad thing. It seems to be like a net neutrality or a net benefit, and I'll talk about some of that stuff in a few minutes. But I'm totally open to this because I didn't have that opinion until I dove into this. It seems to me that there's a possibility that that's one of the misses in the potatoes. And so that's a flaw of GMOs and that they can be potentially harmful. But studies like that have to be able to catch those misses so that we can go back and say, okay, that's not the desirable traits that we're looking for. Let's work on these other potatoes that were maybe B-cut potatoes that we liked, but not as much as these until the studies were done.
Well, the other problem with what you're saying is that when they had found some to try to do these testing, it's illegal to grow the versions. Like over in Europe, they've got a bunch of different crops and stuff banned, some genetically modified stuff. It's illegal to grow it unless it's for research. But the problem is he went around looking to all these farmers to try to grow it so he could do his study, but they were very terrified of growing it because in their contract with Monsanto, who does most of the grain distribution for all of the farmers, says that none of their seed is supposed to be grown for research or they'll lose their contract.
Oh, wow.
So don't look at our shit or we're going to kill your livelihood, combined with the other stuff of...
Hang on. I'm sorry. Can you back up for a second?
Sure.
So I hate to ask you this, but can you just repeat what you had said?
Definitely.
Okay.
Definitely. So farmers have to get their seed from somewhere.
Yep.
They get it typically through Monsanto, biggest distributor of grain and seed grain and stuff like that. In their contract, it says that any grain that they grow can't be used for research. So the argument could be made, don't research our stuff because we want to patent and keep our secrets.
I see what you're saying.
Okay, but I don't think that's the case.
You're raising an eyebrow that those are genetically modified seeds.
Yes, they
being
are
distributed from
Monsanto. And trying to grow the genetically modified and then the original to compare and see and have these tests that are hard to find because people don't want to grow that type of crop because they're told they can't do it for research purposes.
Right.
Because they'll lose their contract.
Interesting. Yeah, everything just smells fishy.
That's what I'm saying. And when you try to poke and get answers, your credentials get taken away and bad shit happens, you know?
So let me ask you this. Do you feel that there's a world where we have honest human beings all over the planet and that GMOs could be a good thing? Like they've found ways to make crops more resistant to disease or cold weather, and it's always a good thing because we've done the testing and we don't have bad players in place to say, well, I need to make a profit, so we're gonna, even though we saw these cancerous potatoes, we're still gonna market them.
Yeah, I think that's possible. But what I would look for to show that that's the case would be that when these, like this TV example happened, and maybe he fucked up and he was wrong and the potatoes weren't, which I don't think they were, you have to have someone come and have a conversation and convince you, because that's what honesty looks like. You can't just silence someone. What it seems like to me is when you silence someone, they're right and you just have a louder voice.
Yep.
Because if you weren't afraid of what they were saying, you'd let them speak and let their speech be proven wrong when it's tested.
Right. And that's why free speech, I think, is one of the most important things, is that everybody gets to have a voice and you get to look like an idiot if you're an idiot.
Right.
Like, and you just have to take ownership of that. I've had my foot in my mouth plenty of times.
I've not.
Tony's, well, what everybody doesn't understand is that Tony is actually a disciple of our Lord and Savior Jesus Christ.
Not anymore.
I got shut down. I wasn't trying to be that facetious, but
it's all good, bro.
Okay, so it sounds like Your opinion is more formulated on the mistrust of those in power of food production and research.
It's not even that, man. Like, I'm all for exploration and I'm all for discovery. I mean, that's what the whole fucking podcast is about. So for me to say, don't explore, don't push lines, that's hypocritical. But when we push those lines and use a population to eat it and be our test subjects, that's where I feel weird about. When we're seeing these inconsistent answers on, hey, this really fucks up rats. And some of these other tests that they saw did like liver damage and weight gain. I'm like, man, look at a lot of our population all out of nowhere in the last X amount of years, obesity is running rampant. To me, the story seems to be more and more sold of, yeah, it's probably the GMO shit that we don't understand. And if you think about, like, as human evolution, maybe one of these things would happen and there'd be a bump and things would level out and we'd have time to evolve, because they're changing so many different things in all of these different aspects of our food. We don't have a way to keep up with that in a way to process and actually utilize it. And so with those extra pieces of DNA and then whatever builds off of that, our body doesn't recognize it and go, store it as fat. It's fine when you have a little bit of that because it'll pass through, but when it's majority of what we're eating, it all builds up.
Yeah.
And so I'm like, as is, I don't think it's a good thing.
I have a different opinion. Nothing that's provable, or at least from the knowledge that I have.
Conversate me wrong, Nick.
But I think that it's more likely that the obesity epidemic, at least in America, is more attributed to the fast food industry that's come up from the 50s. And that's associated with affordable foods. And so, like, when I was younger, and, you know, just starting to get a job and stuff and living on my own, I would eat a lot more, like, high-fat foods. I would eat a lot of Taco Bell. I'd eat high-sodium foods. And all of those things contribute to obesity and contribute to heart disease and cholesterol, unhealthy cholesterol levels and things like that.
But those are the foods that are also going to be full of the genetically modified stuff.
They are, but I think that it's more attributed to the content of what's actually in the foods, like salt,
Sure,
or actual fat and grease, than it is to the fact that it was genetically modified. Just my thoughts, not backed up by anything. But I would be curious to look at, like, obesity charts and heart disease charts and see if there's a correlation between the rise of fast food restaurants. But even that wouldn't necessarily be indicative of GMOs being good or bad, because
yeah, it's not a perfect comparison.
And it goes back to what you're saying. There are so many variables that you can't isolate these individual variables and have a conclusive study easily anyway.
Right.
It takes a lot of effort.
Yeah, it's interesting because when you get into these, like, genetically modification spaces, we're just doing it on plants, we're just doing it on animals. Before you know it, you know, like, we're not that far, we're seeing it. People joke, but, you know, cybernetics, you know, combined with humans, that's coming. We know that.
Yeah.
And then that, to me, is kind of like a weird space of, at what level of replacement are you no longer human? You know? And so I think, going back to where we started talking about genetically modified food, at which point of how many mutations and how far off is this actually no longer really food? Mm-hmm. And it might be changed and it might still always be food, and just, you know, bananas can run around. I don't know. But it makes me think we're moving away from it being viable in food. And if we're doing it to all of it, we fuck up too much too quick. Where's the original to go back to?
Up in Norway, they have a seed vault. Did you know this?
I did not know this.
They have a seed vault of, like, maybe it's literally every known plant they've got seeds for in this underground vault in Scandinavia. I think it was Norway.
It's interesting. We've talked about the lottery and all the money in the world and banking systems and shit. But to me, that seems like probably one of the most valuable vaults in the entire world.
Yeah.
Of all the secrets about aliens and God knows what else, the simple fucking seed vault is what we need for humanity to continue.
Yeah, so that's like in the doomsday scenario that you describe of having like too much human fuckery with our food.
Yeah.
That's like the Rosetta Stone that gets us back to understand what the original world actually was, and we'll just start over.
It makes me feel a little better knowing that someone thought that we could fuck it up that bad and planned for it. Like, hey, someone's got my back. We're going to be good. We're going to be good, fam.
And then, like, Norway holds all the power, bitches.
Yeah. Hopefully they don't
You want seeds?
ego tripping.
About 40 Bitcoin.
Jesus.
I just wanted a papaya. Yeah, so anyway, I totally understand where you're coming from, and I agree with you. Like, I'm aligned on the same thought process there of there are too many things that can be, too many people that are bad players in the world. There are too many variables for me to feel comfortable with conclusions that studies ultimately come to. And that's where I had that's where I couldn't get into each of these individual studies. There are thousands of them to get into.
Right.
But everything that I had come across was that the overall big picture of specifically meta-analysis, where a formal study will be done of a collective group of studies, like hundreds of studies all in one study.
Right.
And the conclusions of those were that there are some differences in GMO and organic foods, but overall, there haven't been any like reported health issues from the ones that have been approved by regulatory bodies like the FDA, which I'm going to be the first to say that I am not super trustworthy of. But the studies have found that they were overall on parity with organically grown foods. Some discrepancies that I had come across were that when it came to organic foods, they tended to have higher levels of antioxidants and phosphorus. But beyond that, it was pretty much the same. And then I wrote down that the best part that I came from like looking at the plants themselves was that GMOs had a reported 38% of the crops would have pesticides on them. And when I thought of organics, I'm thinking, well, you're not allowed to use pesticides with organics, but they still showed a 7% of the crop having pesticides. So regardless, it's still important that you have to go wash your foods.
Right.
But I agree that, like, I think that the organic foods, just from that standpoint alone, are just a net value when compared to GMOs. The part that made me really start kind of like figuring out, okay, if I were going to pick a side, which isn't necessarily what we're here to do, but if I were to do that, that I would lean towards being pro-GMO, is that organic crops require 25% more farmland than GMO crops. And so I'm thinking the research, the broad research, says that GMOs aren't harmful for you. They require less fertilizer to grow, which is harmful for the environment.
Sure.
Those are called ecotoxins. And it requires a fourth less farmland. And I'm thinking clearing the Amazon and, you know, all of that stuff that goes into the land mass. It seems that GMOs are a better trajectory for humanity and the environment. Couple that with some other studies that have been done, like have you heard of golden rice?
Yes.
So that was a very predominant use case that people had pointed to, because vitamin A deficiency in particularly third world countries, but a lot of Asian countries, is such a problem that 500,000 children die every year from vitamin A deficiencies. And I went back and looked at that, and you can find it on the World Health Organization as well, who I also am
Who fucking knows?
wondering if they're a viable authority, but you get the picture.
Yeah.
And so the golden rice is so predominant now because rice is a huge staple for a large percentage of the world. Up to like 70% relies on rice for like 2 out of their 3 meals a day, or a huge proportion of it. And rice is not very nutritious specifically with vitamin A. So they found a way to modify it so that they had some other term. It was like a way that your body absorbs vitamin A better, or maybe the rice produced more vitamin A. But regardless, it was solving the vitamin A deficiency in children. And I was like, okay, that's kind of interesting. So they're finding ways to like directly prevent people from dying from the genetically modified crops. Also producing more food. So just from the laws of supply and demand, that means that there are fewer people without proper nutrition. So if you're thinking third world countries, they're having a more productive crop yield. And so it seemed that it was an overall better value for humanity to have GMOs. I'm going to pause there and also note that that's looking at like a huge, big picture. But I think a lot of people are going to be wondering, well, what should I choose? Because if I'm going into the grocery store and I have enough disposable income to spend the extra bucks to get the organic, should I? I think yes. Like, I think if you have the choice, go get the organic foods, because if you're in that position, then you're probably not vitamin A deficient, or if you are, then you can go pay for supplements, or have a more balanced and healthy diet, and you're just out the extra bucks that it costs.
Trying to think of how I queue up this question. So, in your opinion, genetically modified stuff seems kind of better, but if you have an option not to do it, you should take that option. And the only people who can't have a choice are the people with less money. So rich people are better than poor people is what I just heard.
Yeah, that's pretty much the whole outcome of the entire world. But like we talked about, there are some benefits there are some benefits for organic foods. They have less phosphorus, they have more antioxidants. If you're in a position that you are having issues like with vitamin A deficiency, then the GMO product is actually a better product for you. So if you're in, I don't know, let's say Myanmar or Burma, I don't know what it's called. It's the same country, but it changed names. So I don't know which one's official. I think it's Myanmar. But, well, hell, they've got a coup right now, so stay tuned.
That place over there.
Yeah. Call it what you want.
The country formerly known as
Myanmar. Then your choice should probably be to get the genetically modified rice, because the other rice is not going to be as healthy as the genetically modified rice. Here in the States, we have ample food, and so you can choose a vast variety of different choices, and you can get a balanced diet while eating organic foods.
Yeah, I could be wrong on this one, and I'm happy to be proven wrong. But my gut says that GMO foods are our day's version of cigarettes. They're great. They're fine. They do all these things. We've got the studies. We've got this. This is great. Smoking mothers while you're pregnant. It's awesome.
Yeah, go team.
And now they're like, absolutely not. Don't do that. Like, if you're going to do it, fine, but not. So I just, in my gut, this is the same thing. Now, that's a broad statement and super vilifying, and that's not fair. But after kind of digging in, looking for all these doomsday people, chill the fuck out. It can't be that bad. And going, oh shit, maybe it is that bad.
Yeah, so my gut says go with the organic. I said that outright at the start, was that my gut says natural is better than unnatural. And of course, that's not always the case, but when it comes to food, it definitely seems logical and seems like it should be.
From that evolutionary perspective you mentioned in the beginning too, we've made it this far with natural, it's a safer bet than on the we got
We
smart
know
enough to
what
fuck
we've
with
got.
shit. Yeah.
Yeah. When it comes to the GMO stuff, I can only go off of the research that's been done,
Sure.
regardless of how skeptical I am of it. And because of that, I have to assume that GMOs are not dangerous. The overarching theme that I came across from all of the different studies were that GMOs had pretty much no inherent harm to anybody. My gut says what you're saying, that I don't feel that way, but that's an emotional response and not a scientific response.
Sure.
And I tend to be more of like, if you're going to formulate a concrete opinion, it should be based on evidence. And right now, the evidence that I've come across has not said that GMOs are bad.
It makes sense.
So that's pretty much where my position lied. I like having my own garden because I know what I'm putting in my garden. I know what fertilizers I'm choosing. Not saying that I research the hell out of them or anything, but if I had easy access to somebody with a lot of cow manure, I'd go get that cow manure and I'd use that for fertilizer.
Right.
I'm doing composting right now because I know what's going in that. It's leaf clippings and things like that. Scraps, all going in the compost because I feel like that's a safer bet. I'm more confident in what's included in it than something that's out of my control with another person or a laboratory. Right. Overall, though, my opinion was that the GMOs don't seem to be a bad thing.
Yeah, I mean, obviously time will tell.
Yeah.
And if we all die, we all die. And who knows if it'll be GMOs
Bring
or
it on, baby.
a virus or Godzilla. Godzilla would be cool.
Would it?
Bro, okay.
It'd be cool to watch it on the news and be like, damn, that city's getting wrecked.
If the world is going to fall apart, I don't want it to be with like food shortages or like a fucking virus. Let's go down swinging, you know, in pieces, hanging out of Godzilla's mouth.
Aliens.
There you go, right? Like, come in and just completely wipe me out. Don't let me die slowly and watch all my friends miserably die too. Let's all just go out together to Valhalla.
That's only if you die in valor.
I'm dying in battle, even if it's me running away from a monster. We'll call it battle.
Yeah, we'll take that.
Yep, I made it in. Thanks, guys.
So I had also come across some other interesting things on the GMO side. I can't say surprised, but concerned that 80% of processed foods in the US have GMOs. That's a ton.
Yup.
And I think the reason for that is that a lot of staple crops like corn and things like that can be genetically modified, and that's like a foundation to corn syrup and corn starch and all of these different things.
And anything that oil comes from, and
Yeah, I didn't know that.
soybean oil, corn oil, all of those are the genetically modified grown crops. Wheat,
Yeah.
anything you have flour in. It makes sense, but it's also terrifying at that number.
So then I got into looking into that more because at this point I'm still like on the fence. Well, hell, I still am on the fence.
Sure.
But when I'm looking into this, I was like, okay, so 80% of processed foods in the US have GMOs. Well, what's going on here? And so I dove into it, and it turns out that it's actually not a terrible thing, like you mentioned, oils, to be based off of GMOs, because the DNA makeup doesn't get translated into a lot of the products that come out of that. For example, I didn't know this, but apparently a lot, maybe like the vast majority, but anyway, a lot of sugar in the US comes from beets. And so I didn't get into the whole process of how they're turning beets into sugar, but that's where a lot of our sugar comes from.
So Dwight wasn't an idiot after all.
Yeah, he's onto something here. Yeah, that's probably what Angela saw in him, if we're being real.
He wants to eat beets, but he doesn't know he can turn this into a sugar plantation.
Yeah, no Haiti required. But it turns out that the sugar has the sugar from beets that have been genetically modified have absolutely no differences in their chemical compounds. No DNA is actually getting into the sugar. It has no DNA, and it's 1 grain of sugar is equal to 1 other grain of sugar that didn't come from a GMO product. And so I think that's, again, it's not that like, it's not to say that GMOs can't have any harm, but the products that are coming from those, again, seem to be perfectly safe and have no distinct differences. That can be different if you're eating a corn on the cob that's been genetically modified and a corn on the cob that hasn't been, because that still contains the DNA, because it's like that root product, the original product.
Mm-hmm. What do you think about genetically modified meat?
Like, what about it?
I know most of the stuff we've been talking about today has been more like crops and plants.
Yep.
But what about, did you find anything in your research on like the differences between like organic meat versus genetically modified meat?
Yeah, so blanket statement, I'll say no, but I came across something that was written in 2014, and it was that they had finally created genetically modified salmon that basically get chunkier faster. They put on weight faster. And that paper said that it would, if it were approved by the FDA, it would be the first genetically modified animal on the market. So when you ask me that question, I'm wondering about this too. I didn't, it's not something that I looked into in detail, but I'm thinking that based off of that we're not having genetically modified animals like cows and pigs and chicken. Instead, I think what might be happening is that those organisms have been fed GMO enhanced products. I did read that 90% of GMO crops are used for livestock feed.
Right. Well, I'm talking about, you know, some of the, like, even if you just look at our history of chickens, you know, not that long ago, chicken wasn't that huge of a bird. Today, you go to these, you know, chicken factories, and these things are so fucking big, they can't even stand.
Yeah.
That's like,
so
that has me concerned.
So that's actually kind of going down a different path, I think.
Okay.
I think what's happening there is that we're talking about organic chickens being, you know, exactly what everybody thinks of with an organic chicken, like an actual fucking chicken related to T-Rex at some point.
Or maybe like wild chicken might be an easier delineation.
Yeah, a wild chicken. There we go. Thank you, Tony.
You're welcome.
And then you've got, I wouldn't call it a genetically modified chicken. I'd call it a chicken that had been fed genetically modified foods or pumped up with hormones so that it has a faster, whatever the hormones do to actually make them plump.
So I guess this is the next question. Is adding those hormones genetic modification?
No, because it's not modifying the genes themselves. It's regulating how much food you take in. So like, you know, people with the thyroid issues have hormonal issues, and so they have to take a hormone balancer.
So it's just what it's doing. It's not actually changing at the DNA level. It's just fucking with what's already there.
Right.
Got
it. Like, I don't know actually what's happening here, but like if you, my hypothesis right now is
makes
that
sense.
Thyroids regulate how much food you can, or how much it regulates your metabolism. So if you have a thyroid issue, you can be heavy set. And if you want a chicken to be heavy set because it makes more food, then inject some type of hormone that makes the thyroid less impactful.
I don't think that's a perfect correlation because heavy set is typically fat and like obesity.
Yeah.
Whereas on the other hand, what I'm seeing here is like even some of these cows, they're looking like fucking Hulk ripped out. It's just because their muscles have grown so much so
beefy,
fast.
pardon my
So I don't think it's quite the same.
Yeah, so my example is on like thyroids because that's the only thing that I can think of. But I'm sure that, well, think about like steroids. Steroids are talked about with food as well. And when I think of steroids, I'm thinking like, you know, Arnold Schwarzenegger I assume that it's the same type of concept applied to
Yeah, it's
other
not
foods.
it's not changing the gene, it's just amping it up.
Yeah.
So it's similar but not the same.
right.
Cool.
Right. And so like the hormone stuff seems like that can be whack. As a hunter, I've learned that the reason that venison can be kind of gamey, which is what a lot of people don't like about eating venison, that can come from the stress that's released from somebody who didn't make a clean shot. And so when I'm eating my venison, so far I've had 4 deer, and I don't know what piece comes from where, but it doesn't have much gaminess. And 3 out of my 4 deer were real clean kills. The other one took a little bit longer, and so I feel like an absolute asshole about that. But I'd be curious to like go and taste those. But anyway, I just wanted to kind of bring that up because the hormones that are released, stress hormones and things like that, can change the flavor and change what's going on in our foods. And so I can see that there's a world where hormones are bad,
Right.
and GMOs can be okay, or vice versa, or a combination of the two. But they're just different things. They have different effects.
Yeah, and I think it's interesting too on how I don't know if there's objective, like truly objective minds going in here, because there's so many people playing in this space. Like you think about all the people invested up and down the pole just on, let's just talk about beef. People who own the ranches, then you got distributors, and then all the suppliers. You've got, fucking Kroger, everyone in the middle, steakhouses, all invested in things not changing.
Mm-hmm.
And they've done years of marketing on steaks amazing. And when I've had it, it is. That's a revenue they've built. They've built a business. They've built this long-standing, sometimes generational income stream.
Yeah.
Well, how do we make it? How do we grow it? And so let's take the same cow and get twice as much meat, pump it full of all this stuff. Great business decision.
Mm-hmm.
I get it. Makes sense. What they're not doing is, I don't think, enough testing to go, how does that affect a human? Because I don't think a little bit of hormones in a day, in a short term, we're probably going to see anything.
Right.
But you see that consistently ingested over a lifetime. And that's where some of this stuff is scary, is because a lot of it has been tested and approved on a short term, even a couple year basis. But I don't think we've had a decades basis. And I think a lot of this systemic stuff we're seeing, and it's probably not just GMOs or overdoing the hormones or all of these things. It's probably a piece of all of them. And we just haven't taken the time to figure out where it's coming from.
Yeah, it's hard to pinpoint exactly what's happening. And I agree. It seems like, well, I don't know. It seems like there are a shit ton of studies out there that have been done on this. But I think the problem goes back to like your Tony Blair example, going back to the Institute with the cancerous potatoes. If you're relying on more steak to be coming in so that you can meet the demands in your restaurant, then you have an incentive to sweep the studies under the rug that talk about the damaging effects that might be going on.
Right.
And same is true on the other side. Like if you're a rancher, you'd want to be doing the same thing. So it's
because if it all goes to shit, that's what you've done for generations. You've got all this land, and now hypothetically in this example, cows are bad, you can't grow them. What the fuck do you do with your life?
Yeah.
That's a huge
or
transition.
you need to get twice as much land to grow twice as many pounds of meat.
Yep.
So yeah, it's interesting, but I think that goes back to it's that balance, because it takes us back to, even if GMOs are bad, you still have to have 25% more land to produce the same yield, is what I had read. And so those farmers are going to have to go and like find more land to clear, and then that's going to be more problems. They have to use fertilizers that leach into the river systems and pollutants. And so you'd have to ban fertilizers, and so that's going to reduce even more crop that would be produced otherwise.
Well, it's interesting. I never understood why people were so excited about like bio farming, where they have like the fish in the bottom, like aqua farming.
Yeah.
And then, you know, the fish poop and it filters and constantly brings nutrients to your plants and it's self-sustaining. And oh my God, this is amazing. And I'm like, there's dirt. Why? But now hearing all of this, those look like the solutions everyone hypes them for. Because if we're taking away some of these other options that have had for forever, but now we're realizing they might be scary, well, we're going to need more land to not do these things and maintain up with our current supply and demand. Here are some of these other options. And of course, anything, if that's the case, that takes time and transition to get set up, transferred over. And then, of course, people see a new emerging market and they're going to try to fuck it up because there's a play there. And goddamn.
Yeah, it gets muddy, real messy.
Yep.
Yeah, so it's I know that I've already said this, but it seems that my end conclusion was if you can choose organic is not bad. So you know what you're getting with organic. So if you have concerns, get the organic food.
That's a good way to put it.
Otherwise, seems to be no reason not to get GMO food. Just, you know, again, as like a net outcome of the majority of the studies. If you get into the studies, it gets too messy because there are too many different biases and people on both sides trying to incentivize one way or the other. But if you can, just subsistence farm.
What does that mean?
Like subsistence farmers are farmers who farm for just themselves.
Oh, so you're just like, hey guys, be me.
No, don't be me because I don't do it very well.
Okay.
But
fair enough.
Yeah, get your fish ponds and grow your vegetables that way.
Yeah, definitely. This is a good one, man. I like when we come into ones with wildly different perspectives because it helps me challenge and go deeper, and it's good.
Yeah,
shit.
I agree. And like the study that you had come up with the I am harping on this a lot, the cancer of potatoes.
Yeah.
Fascinating because like now I got a stew going right now. I'm like, I think I'm gonna pass on the potatoes.
That's hilarious.
I'm not, but you get the idea.
Right on. Well, thanks for hanging out, everybody. Let us know if there's any specific topics you'd like us to cover. Toss us an email at moderndayapocrypha@gmail.com, and we'll catch you next week.
Yeah, or check out the website. Same thing, moderndayapocrypha.com, and there's a little portal down at the very bottom of the page about suggesting topics.
Perfect.
So you can do that too.
Awesome.
Peace out.